So tonight, we have Luke Jones with Understanding Ag, and he's been a really good partner with us in ILGLC and any resource concerns or things that we have questions with. He's usually one of my first phone calls. So we're very happy to have Luke on board with us, and I'm sure that many of you have seen him out and about and around at various other events or even called him on the phone for help. So we're happy to have Luke here with us, and we're going to dig in and learn more about soil biology and kind of how we can improve it and kind of what's actually going on underneath the forage that we have.
For those of you that don't know me, as Logan said, my name's Luke Jones. My wife and our kids and I, we have a small farming and livestock operation here in West Central Illinois, a town called Rushville. Um, Pretty much first generation farming operation. I've always wanted to be a part of agriculture and always wanted to work in agriculture. I always thought there was so much to be gained, but so much to just enjoy while working in that career. So I did the thing that everybody else seemed to be doing at that age, and that was going to college. Get a degree, try to work your way in through the agricultural workforce. So I went to Western Illinois, studied in ag science with a focus in agronomy. Uh, Luckily, I had a professor there, Joel Groover, who kind of kept me always thinking outside of the box. Got me started on cover crops, thinking on what they can do. But he always had us interviewing producers who were doing some of these off the wall things, that were against mainstream, against the conventional models, and making it go, being profitable at it. So it always had me questioning, is conventional the best way to go? While at the same time, I was also studying under Dr. Gordon Roskamp, who was pretty much a master of herbicides, memorizing everything about them things, how they worked, how they affect the plants, modes of action, sites of action, you name it. Going through all those. So graduated college, got a job at a local ag retailer. Worked as a crop scout, worked as a custom applicator, sales associate, and then eventually a salesman there at that retail shop. So did that for a few years, had our first child, got sick and tired of seeing producers not making money, even though we were doing all the right recommendations, supposedly doing everything we're supposed to be doing. They're following our recommendations. High yields weren't cutting it. People were still not making money. And I had a young producer tell me if it wasn't for crop insurance, you wouldn't have made money that year. Um, and to me, I still struggle when I think about that. But after that, went to work for a producer. He was wanting some cattle on his land, and I've always wanted to have my own group of cattle. So we invested in some cattle and was working with that local producer. Had a little setback there, fall of 21. That laid me up for a while. Um, Understanding Ag called me, and I was doing some soil sampling part time previous to that accident. So I was kind of had a relationship with them, and they asked me if I was interested in consulting with them, and I that was something that I was unsure of at the time. But now that since we've got into it and we started to really dive into the mission and vision of what we're after here and what we're trying to do as far as educating producers and just the whole general public and as it is about what soil health and regenerative ag is. It's really a wholesome message, and it's rewarding in many ways. So this job has now taken me from England, Ireland, working with clients over there. We work on a global basis and been all across America, worked with many different producers and companies, and we got a long way to go. But I guess you call that job security as well. But
What exactly is going on underneath the ground? What's the biology? What's it doing? Why is it there? And things like that. So
yeah, so really throughout college, we were studying the physical and the chemical forms of it, and they briefly mentioned biology, the three components of what makes soil soil. Um, but we never really dug into the biology. And what really wasn't until, you fall into that soil health rabbit hole, start your YouTube and all these things, and then you start finding white papers on stuff, and you're just, wow, where are we going with all this, right? The biology is, it's everything for me. The more I understood how important biology was, um, it really started to make things click. And the simplest thing that I can say as far as how biology is and what it works, if you think of the soil food web, what it is it's essentially the process of eating and being eaten. That is what biology is and does for us and how powerful it is. But it's such a simple thing. It's things preying and being predated on. With biology, there's things going on underneath our feet all the time. Things are being, you got bacteria which are being consumed by nematodes, and it's just there's something is bigger eating whatever ate the next biggest thing, right? So, and that just follows through all the way above soil. And how the plants work in synchrony with biology. Um, it's such a powerful deal. It takes the plants to feed the biology, it takes the plants to capture the sun, but in turn, how that all feeds back to each other. So, uh, the thing is with biology is it's there. But the thing is, we can also improve what's there and grow with what's there. Um, our job as grazing managers is simply that. How can we grow that habitat for that biology to proliferate and do its job? And I love this slide here because it really just ties them together. We hear many times about healthy plants, healthy soil, healthy plants, healthy animals, healthy humans. And to me, it's just we are all so interconnected with what's going on underneath our feet that the better job we do of stewarding that biology, the fungi, the bacteria, the nematodes, all those things that even, working in agrito, when you hear nematodes and funguses and bacterias and viruses, well, we're doing everything we can to hold those issues back, right? To prop up a monoculture, and that's the complete wrong thing that Mother Nature wants. And that's why I think, grazing livestock, grazing ruminants on these acres, getting them back out on the land, letting them inoculate that land. It's just more of a natural process, through the saliva, through the urine, through the hoof, through the dandruff, through the manure. Everything that's cycling that back in and inoculating that soil just helps connect everything to that plant and everything back to that animal, which eventually relates back to us. And you hear many times if Provenza, Stefan Van Vliet, those folks who are actually studying the nutrient density of this meat. Zach Bush even talks about it some if you get into some of his stuff, how knowing that food and knowing how nutrient dense it is and how well it satiates you, if you will, and you can connect back with that food. So it's so powerful for us to harness that biology, to let it do its job, provide the habitat for it, and only to help improve human population and human health for years to come. So that's why I love looking at this picture and seeing the relationship of the biology on the plants, the biology in the room, and the biology in the soil, and how it connects back to us as humans as well.
When you start looking at things like that and seeing it as a big picture, it's so much more than just the soil. I mean, it's so vastly different than just, well, how can I improve my soil? You're not only improving your soil, you're improving the whole ecosystem, including humans around us. And
That's right.
the deeper you get in that, it's pretty mind blowing, the
That's right.
complexity of it for sure. So yeah, some of the questions, a lot of it has to do with weeds. So the big weed talked about here is thistle.
Good
How
old
how
thistle.
can we manage it? What is it telling us?
Yep. Yeah. So all plants are indicator species, right, of what the system is allowing to happen there. There's plenty of books out there, When Weeds Talk, Weeds and What They Tell Us. There's plenty of resources out there that kind of help us understand what's going on there. But the thing about it is, and I know there's times I slip and I call them weeds too, but are they really weeds? Are we, um, do we have our management in place to where we can potentially utilize those? Because the minute we can turn those into an income stream, instead of an expense, then
Yeah.
that's money back in our pockets, right? So with thistles, it's typically a calcium issue, compaction issue, but also there's times where if you just leave it be, they'll self-correct that issue and they're going to essentially kill themselves out of that environment, if you will. So I guess it depends on what you can stand to look at, what your landlords can stand to look at. I don't worry so much about thistles. Um, Actually, I've used chickens as a tool against thistles. You can put a chicken through a razor blade plate, I think, and they're going to be fine. I'm talking laying hens here.
Yeah.
But they will trample thistles like nothing. So if it's something you can't stand to look at, hang your feeders or if you got a feeder inside your egg mobiles, place that above wherever the thistles are, and you'll annihilate thistles. If you've got certain times of the year, cattle will actually pick the heads off of thistles. I've seen people train them with molasses, but you don't even need to go that far if you don't want to. Just proper stock densities, keeping animals in there for a short burst period of time will do wonders. You got to remember that if animals aren't eating certain species that we're wanting them to, now doesn't mean we want to force them to eat everything because there are some species out there that if they get too much, can cause some issues. But if we can create that competitiveness within that group, they're going to go pick and choose, because now they have to go get something to eat or else they're going to miss out on, they know they're going to miss out on probably that favorite best bites. They got to eat what's next. So, thistles, I don't really worry so much about, um, unless you've got an extreme issue, but use some of the tools, like say, chickens are phenomenal at it. So,
Yes, yeah, and funny that thistle conversation. I had it with several folks earlier today at a different event I was at, and a lot of them had the same response that you just had. Let it
yeah,
be, and within a year or two, it generally fixes itself. Now, if you
yeah,
start going to mow it and doing things like that, and you're really spreading the seed and doing things, then you start seeing more issues. But like I say, if you can stand
yeah.
and look at it, let it be, let it be. So another question I had today, Foxtail. So a lot of these are the same questions I've addressed at a different event today. So Foxtail, what are our thoughts? My response, and you can tell me if I'm wrong, unless it's in vast quantity, that's really good free summer annual feed.
That's poor man's pearl millet, is
Yeah.
what I call it. Um, it can be a burden, but really it's with your warm season, it's a warm season species there. So the sooner we can get out there, if we're battling it after wheat and things like that, getting something properly established, it'll choke out pretty well. If it's already got a foothold and started though. It depends on what your goals are, what your context is. It's very easy to kill if you do need to kill it, right? So a slight snort of Roundup will take care of that and allow your cover crops to come on after that. If you're dealing with in pastures, well, um, it's an easy growing plant, so it tells us that you've probably bared up that area a little too much. And it's just an opportunistic plant that's going to be one of the first ones to be there, early succession kind of plant. And it's going to be one of the first things to cover that ground, just like crabgrass. It's going to be there to help cover that soil, get something growing. No, it doesn't have extreme nutritional value for a long period of time, but there is a period there where it is, fairly decent. But like I said, sometimes you're better off to deal with what you have. Like I said, we're talking about biology here too, right? In this talk, so it is feeding biology, right? So it's not that it's a wasted plant or a worthless plant. It's stimulating biology in some way, shape, and form.
Yep. And these weeds or forbs, they're like you said earlier, they're all telling us something about that particular area that they're in, and it's kind of I've heard it used as the soil's band-aid. If
Yeah.
something was scarred up or there's some overgrazed areas that has bare soil, those are filling in the holes. How is foxtail good for cattle or animals since it causes sores? The only thing I know about that is when mature foxtail is in hay. I know horses have a bad problem with getting those seeds in their gums and causes abscess and things like that. I'm not real familiar with any issues on cattle, but like I said, I know the issue is when you're trying to feed those seed heads.
Yeah, I could see that with the horse issue. As far as the other cattle, sheep, I've not had any issues with it
Yeah.
causing any sores or anything. But I guess I don't know much about horses, but I know they are finicky
It
about some of
it
that.
for sure is the thing with horses. I know, like I said, I've
Yeah,
never experienced it in anything else, any type of
yeah,
ruminant animal. So I don't know if that's exactly what uh, you're referring to, but anyway, that's my outlook on it and my experience with it is in horses specifically. We talked about kind of what we're dealing with. So why does this matter? Why should we care about soil health and biology and try to build it?
yeah. Well, it's to me, it's everything. The more we you harness and work with our biology, that the longer it's going to repay us back. As we're sitting here today, West Central Illinois, I know Illinois for the large majority of it is got some kind of D1 or two in front after it right now. So we're currently sitting in a D2 drought in our area. As I look at ponds and um, as I look at some of the bare ground that's drying off now that the sun's come off and the snow's melted off around here, um, things aren't going into this spring very, very well. They got some precip talking about. But right now we're sitting into D2. I know there's other areas that are worse off than us, and you know, I also checked down at Perry. Illinois has a soil probe down there, and upper at 4 to 8 inches. We're right on average as far as moisture content. But the 20-inch probe, we're flirting with the extreme minimum it's had ever, as far as moisture profile. So we're as far as a record low on 20 inches, we're flirting with that, which scares me. We're going to need some good spring rains here, which could mean, delayed planting for those guys that are dealing with row crops. For us with pasture that have well managed pastures, it's just, adding fuel to the fire for us, right? It's keep on going, keep things trucking. So, um, as biology, if we protect that, it helps us retain longer from some of these weather events. So, even if we do get into drought, as soon as if we've got some armor out there, if we've done a good job of soil health management in the past, even a little bit of rain is those plants and everything are going to respond a lot faster and a lot stronger than our neighbors will. That inch of rain is no longer an inch of rain for our neighbors, but it is for us potentially, right? We're going to have more utilization of that moisture. Plus, we're going to be able to protect from evaporation if we have any bare soil or not enough forage out there. If we're not actively growing, we're not releasing that moisture from the soil, right? So it's definitely a great way to proof yourself of extreme weather events as well.
Yeah. And how does that drought affect how the biology moves in the water cycle and all that goes on in the soil?
Yeah, so all the organisms that we're talking about here tonight, everything underneath our feet is a subaquatic organism, right? So it needs moisture to move. We like to say biology in the soil lives on and in the thin films of water between soil aggregation. So as I mentioned, with the biology and the plants, those two things together, along with the sun and the moisture, helps create soil aggregates within our soil profile, those clumps of soil that are held together by those plant root exudates, right? That biology that we need that's cycling and releasing nutrients, as I said, eating, being eaten, um, they move in between those films of water in those soil aggregates. There's even little micropores within those aggregates that the biology is swimming and moving through. So, if we want nutrient cycling, if we want proper moisture utilization, the deeper we can get that aggregation built into our soil profile, the better off we're going to be. Because then we have essentially a checking account that we can pull against. As we turn into the dry period, hey, well, at least we built aggregation deeper. Because biology it's gonna an aggregate's only gonna sustain itself for about 25 to 27 days without being fed carbon through the living roots. So the deeper we can build those aggregates, the more of a slough you have down there that you can slough off until we can get regrowth and new exudates popping in there again. So
Yes. So as our biology and health improves, how is that affecting us above here managing it as far as input cost, productivity, grazing strategies, anything to go with that?
yeah, so obviously, like I said, when we get the biology cranking right, get the habitat built for them, there's loads of nutrients in those soil profile. I think if anybody doesn't believe that, go take a total nutrient digestion test, 0 to 12 inches in your soil, and you're going to see you got loads of nutrients there to work with already. The only way you're going to be able to access those through the biology. So let the biology work for you instead of the retail salesman working for you, buying fertilizer year in, year out. There's a slide later on that we'll get to that talks about the power of just the manure from the animal and what kind of nutrients we can deposit there. So, letting that biology do its job should help us pull away from the amendments. The more we get aggregation built, the more armor we get built, the less invasive weeds or forbs that we're going to have to battle, or the things that we're actually going to be able to utilize. Maybe we're not going to be spending money on killing those species. Maybe we just embrace them and utilize them, right? So, how does that affect us? In general, well, I don't want to have to handle any pesticides any more than I have to, right? I've been bit by it once and I don't want to be bit by it again. So, the less we have to handle those products, the better it is for our overall environment. The birds, the insects above ground, it's all part of that soil food web. And the more that we throw products out there that's going to affect that, thinking about a rung on a ladder, right? The more, if we take out an apex predator, then that just allows look at it this way: if we go around and kill all the coyotes, our rabbit population is going to explode, and we're going to be infested with rabbits, right? So it's a proper balance, allowing the habitat to find balance itself. It will if we provide the habitat for that. So, as biology's working, we're getting more nutrient dense plants, which means our animals are going to be healthier. They don't need to eat as much. So, that turns in, perfectly with what you said on the slide, the video starting here, Logan. Those bricks levels will start to increase. we see higher values of gain with higher bricks levels, right? And that comes from soil carbon and more by microbial activity in the soil. That also means an animal doesn't have to eat as much. So guess what? Your farm just grew, right? So your acres are essentially growing without even buying land. So improving that soil helps you grow forage and gain forage without even, having to sign a check for buying the land for it.
Yeah. And that's a big deal when we start talking about land prices in today's economy,
Right.
and trying to make those payments. Yeah.
Yep.
And that's the type of thing that's not going to happen overnight either. This is a journey that
Yep.
goes on and on. And you got to kind of keep chasing that and keep improving and building and growing as well.
That's
Um,
right.
yeah, definitely not something going to happen overnight. So, okay, we have a few questions here about mowing or clipping pastures to control seed heads and some of the weeds and foxtails and things like that. What are your thoughts on that, Luke?
Um, to each their own on that. I mean, I know there's some validity to some of that. Um, I know Trevor, we always joke, we always
Yeah.
butt heads about him clipping his pastures, but his system's a little different than what I'm running as. I can see, um, keeping that vegetation a higher quality for a longer period of time. But the way I look at it is I want my plants just to run their natural cycle. I don't really try to worry about clipping seed heads or anything. They don't affect me. Matter of fact, they actually help me because I want to help distribute seed. Uh, we graze primarily sheep here, and we've actually seen our sheep are now starting to graze seed heads more. We deal with a lot of fescue here, so it doesn't bother them. So it doesn't hurt our performance at all. Matter of fact, I'm happy that they're eating them. Saves me from having clipped. But either way, it's just a natural phenomenon of that plant to want to go ahead and produce seeds. So I guess properly stocking is probably the number one thing. If you're worried about forages getting ahead of you, maybe you need to be moving a little faster. But I tell you, I've tried to do that, keep up with things, keep them vegetative. You'll burn yourself out trying to do that. I'd much rather start to select for species of livestock that are actually wanting to work into that longer rest and recovery period. Maybe you have to supplement some here and there during that rougher time where there's some lesser quality forage. Sure, you might have to, but to me, the pain of buying that is worth the gain of that longer rest period and the less amount of forage you're going to have to buy later down the road. So I guess it just depends on each individual, what your pocketbook says, what your context, what are your goals. Um, that- you know, I'm not against mowing, but to me, I can get by without it easily.
Yep. Yep. I'm on the same page as what you are, Luke, as well, what we do on our farm. The few times that I have tried to stay ahead of everything and keep it vegetative, I ran myself ragged, used a ton
Yeah.
of diesel, and it just wasn't worth it to me. And then years later, I tried something similar again, and it never rained. And I
Yeah.
put myself more or less in a drought without grass. So I was using all of my stockpile I could have had during that dry period. I clipped and didn't have it.
Yeah. Yeah, and
Um,
I always get a kick out, I don't mean to be derogatory here or anything, but people are always clipping pastures in the dead heat of summer and they're clipping them down low. And I'm like, you're just any moisture you do get now, you've lessened your ability to capture that inch of rain. That soil's more exposed now, more bare. Um, I just don't like the way that some of that chaff lays on the ground.
mhm.
It's just,
Oh yeah.
I don't know. I just my feelings are, I think, like you said, I've followed that theory of keep it vegetative and chase it, but man, I like my family too much to, to try to
Oh,
try to chase that too much.
and we've got all the background. So how do we do this? How do we build this soil to build this better ecosystem?
Yep. So obviously, with understanding ag, we have a platform that we talk about a lot, and that we stand behind. It's called the 634. So that's simply the six principles of soil health that you hear. NRCS had, I think it was the four principles or four principles of soil health that they talked about, and we've kind of added a couple more onto them based on what we've gathered over the years. But it's simply first understanding your context, right? What are your goals of your operation? Everybody's got a different moisture concern, family concern, financial concern, everything there. Every field has its own context. Every day should have its own context, really, when you're making decisions out there. So really understanding your why behind what you're going to be doing that day will help guide you as far as how these other things fall into place. So After that, we like to look at living roots. This land wants to be covered as much as possible. It wants a living root feeding it as constantly as possible. So a living root as close to 365 as possible. Illinois struggles with that in general as I drive across and even look around here locally. A lot of bare ground, right? A lot of starving biology out there because that's what it takes is this plant, releasing those exudates to stimulate and feed biology because they simply work together. Soil armor, the roof of the house, if you will, helps tremendously help regulate the soil temperature, soil moisture, protects it from the erosion, rain impact, things like that, that just kind of help protect that house for the biology to be happy in, right? So surface armor is critical for improving soil health to allow this biology to do its job. Minimizing our disturbances, whether they're chemical, physical, grazing, doesn't matter. Minimizing our disturbances over the large scale, helps tremendously. The more if we're plowing ground, we have to obviously think, how does that hurt our biology? Well, we start to destroy the house and destroy the home very, very fast. If we're using herbicides a lot out there, if we're killing out those plants, well, we're starving biology because we're killing out those plants. Even though something will come back in its place, it does have an effect there, right? Uh, Adding diversity. How much diversity do we have on that operation? Diversity is the spice of life. The more diverse plants we have out there, which is in turn going to equal the more diverse biology we're going to have. In turn, the more nutrient dense beef we're going to have, or beef lamb. All that starts to correlate together. So having diversity is critical. And then obviously livestock integration. So those six principles there, as I mentioned earlier, with that connection of the soil, plant, and animal and human health, that livestock integration is so critical to improve and expedite our soil health building processes. And I don't think it can really truly be done properly without animal integration. I even though I'm a row crop guy myself and do the row crop system, I'm looking for any way I can to get animals back on our land. More building, more fence, and more fences we can. So that's the only true way I think we're ever going to be able to repair and rebuild the soil. So that's why I appreciate IGLC leading the charge here in the state as far as talking about the livestock grazing, getting it out there, getting it more commonplace, and we just got to keep hammering the message that it takes livestock integration for this thing to really uh, start hitting on all cylinders. Um, then we talk about the three rules, the rule of diversity again. It's so critical having that diverse, whether it's animal integration, diverse species there. Diversity is just critical. The rule of disruption, even though we talk about minimizing disturbances, there are planned purposeful disruptions do have its place. We hear people talk about what's their preferred or their only grazing system. There's many people out there that wear hats of graze half, leave half, take a third, leave a third, trample a third, 21-day rest rotation, total grazing. There's all these different programs, and all these people like to wear their own hat. But I hate to be the bearer of bad news. It's all of those systems together is what makes adaptive grazing and improving soil health possible. I'm definitely not a purist in one of those approaches because there are days where I'm going to probably have a total graze approach. We're dealing with that here this winter with our sheep. We had some leftover hay ground that we didn't get hayed, and in order to make that easier for next spring. Plus, it was too good to not graze right now with the way the weather was. So we essentially took that 70% of that ground off, but it also equaled to about 550 ewe days per acre. So you can take a small hay patch and graze quite a few sheep. So that's the reason why we did that. So um, don't get stuck in one grazing system because you'll also crash. Mother Nature gets adapted to that, and she'll catch up with you, and you're going to plateau very fast. So it's always good to keep things mixed up, and that's where the rule of disruption. What we mean by that is keeping things mixed up, and there are planned purposeful disruptions that we can perform on that ground to stimulate and encourage Mother Nature to respond and work to our favor. And then the rule of compounding, understanding that every action that we take or we implement is going to have a equal or negative reaction after that. So call it the ripple effect, if you will. If I do a total graze here, um, what does that mean? Well, you better start leaving that ground to rest and recover for a longer period of time. Otherwise, if you come back too soon, it's going to negatively impact the soil biology, your soil aggregation, your soil water infiltration and holding capacity. You name it. The list just starts going on and on. And then real quick, the four that we talk about. the energy cycle. We know how do we capture that solar energy, the water cycle, the nutrient cycle, and community dynamics, or building that diversity. So that's really what we talk about as far as if we're going to drive and build soil biology and soil health. It's addressing it that way. So, I'm not against feeding hay at all. Feeding hay should be a tool, but feeding it like this in a dry lot just drives me absolutely nuts. I think there's way better ways to utilize hay for, if we're going to be feeding hay or using it as a tool, let's get it out on the land we either take it from or utilize it strategically where we need some of that nutrient load to help our pastures or help our land and improve some. So if we're going to feed our animals, let's get them out, get them moving, get them away from the dry lot and feed lot areas, and let's get the nutrients out there. I mean, the animals, somebody talked about mowing. Well, the mower itself, it's also a manure spreader, a roller crimper, you name it. And it's also a nice looking meat wagon running around out there. So utilize these animals as tools. Everything above ground, the livestock that I'm talking about here, the livestock above the ground are just marketable tools to really in turn drive and build your livestock below ground. It's the livestock below the ground that we need to take care of the most and the ones that we need to focus on the most because they will in turn help us take care of the livestock above ground. So, feeding that hay, you hear anywhere from 50 to $75 a ton in hay value back to the land. So, you know, hay at $50 a bale, you're at least getting roughly half that back in nutrient value already. So, um, yeah, get your hay out and feed it, and get your livestock out there and get them grazing. This we've seen this slide a lot. We've talked about it a lot as far as the nutrient value of a cattle patty. Uh, every cow per day, almost a quarter pound of N, 0.15 of P2O5, and 0.52 of K2O, and that's talking DAP potash, if we will, P2O5 and K2O. So if we look at grazing 100 cows on an acre for one day, we're looking at a pretty nice nutrient profile there, right? And I even did the justice here of doing the math for the sheep as well, because God forbid we leave out sheep since I'm a sheep herder, right? So when I talk about sheep, I did the math on this. So a ewe per year is going to give off 30 to 50 units of nitrogen, 10 to 15 units of P2O5, and 30 to 40 units of K2O. But over 50% of the N and K2O are in the form of urine, okay? So if we break that down into, let's say that example where I gave where I was grazing 550 U days per acre on that hay ground, right? So that equates to 44 units of nitrogen, 14.85 units of P2O5, and 44 units of K2O. So a nice little fertility program on that hay ground, right? For just 10 days worth of grazing there with that small group of commercial ewes that I had out there. So um, don't take it lightly. Sheep have just as good of manure value, if you will, than a cow.
Getting row crop ground and building it back into pasture. I've had experience with this and it's not easy. And I know you're playing with it as well. So give us some tricks and some ideas of what we can kind of expect when we go down this path.
Yeah, so I mean, I've heard a few different ways, and it's the ones that seem to work the best are the ones that I wouldn't do, honestly. I've heard of people just going ahead and seeding their perennial mix right away and knocking it out of the park. I like the slower approach. I've always thought, and I've been taught, right, that seeding it with annuals first for a couple of years, taking the time and doing that. Um, it's been a slow process for me getting that to establish. I'll be flat out honest with you, and maybe I just haven't done it right. That's probably the answer. But I've come at it with annuals, graze them out, and then seed a new annual, and then did that for a couple seasons. And my perennial stand was lackluster, I'll say. I haven't been too thrilled, but I haven't done any more seeding, and what's coming in is starting to look pretty impressive. So it's been a slower go. Um, but that being said, I've just had, a slightly more expense in annuals, but I do fairly light seeding rates as well. I don't go over the top on seeding rates by any means. I think we can get a lot of grazing out of lower rates, honestly. So I look at seeds per square foot more so than pounds per acre on a lot of this stuff. So, um, and getting those to express themselves. So, um, yeah, I mean, it is tough because you're going to have more forbs or annuals that you don't want out there coming in. than what you're seeding or what you're hoping to come in. But the thing about it is if you graze properly, uh, run tighter groups, you're going to be able to utilize those. I mean, whether it's ragweeds or lamb's quarters or whatever, water hemp, mare's tail, it's all good forage. It'll convert, so don't get too worried about it. But I would probably at least for a season and a half, try to get some annuals out there prime and feed that biology before you start to put in perennials, especially your natives, your warm season natives.
Yeah, the experience I've had was on the worst experience I've had, I should say, was going straight from very conventional washed out hill ground, taking it right out of crops and trying to establish natives. That was a nightmare.
Yeah,
Nightmare. And like I said, I've had some small patches that I went with just a fescue based mix, pretty generic to get started, and worked okay. But I
yeah,
think more times than not, if you can do like your annual rotation for at least a year, if not more.
yeah,
And what really what really changed it for me going from that to the prairie land or prairie grass type was I spent one whole winter unrolling hay on that
yeah,
and really just turned the whole entire deal around. And after
yeah.
that, I started having success. So
Yeah, and the warm season natives are more, they need a more fungal relationship. So if you're coming from a row crop system, which is going to be more bacterial dominant, that's where if you're doing warm season natives, getting that fungal component up will allow the establishment of those a lot better. So,
yes, yes, and that's pretty much exactly what happened for us. So another question here about kind of reviving some pastures, getting rid of old fescue without using a plow to seed better grasses.
so the good thing about fescue is December, January, February, March.
Yes. Yep.
Um, the fescue for what we talk negatively about it, it does serve really good purposes, and it's you're never going to outcompete it, in my opinion. You can do some harder grazes with longer rest periods to try to stimulate some warm seasons to come in, and that's doable. I've seen some grease grass and some things like that come in, which is still diversity, but fescue's got a strong foothold. It's tough to overcome, so just embrace it. Start selecting for animals that are thriving in your environment and weed out the ones that aren't. That's the simplest thing you can do instead of trying to hit the reset button in your pasture because honestly, it's just going to revert back to fescue anyway, probably if you do that anyway. So,
Yep. Yep. I totally agree with that answer. Like you say, find out you can't beat it, so join it type of deal. And
yeah, exactly.
animal selection is a very big thing on that, and grazing management styles is
Yeah.
two things that will really help kind of overcome those issues.
That's where I found getting annual, if you've got annual crops at all, getting some cover crops in there, great stockpile those, graze those into the fall and into the winter while your fescue is stockpiling itself. And then you've got good winter season grazing there. So if you've got fescue, let it stockpile and graze in the winter. That's your best system there, and utilize some row crop ground to get some annuals out there to graze in the meantime.
One more question. I think you answered it, but may have been missed. He asked, how long after seeding are you turning livestock out?
Yeah, that's when I typed in an answer there. So like I said, just it depends on what species you're seeding as well. As I said, with annuals, I'd like to see at least 6 inches of growth before you start, depending on how many animals you're running, how big of an area you've got, you name it. Because the thing is with some of these annuals, we wait and wait and wait, and before we know it, we're behind the ball, and we're never going to be able to get hardly any utilization out of it. So, 6 inches and start. With your perennial pasture, I guess it's about the same situation, right? Leave some to start with to begin with. Um, so, perennial seedings, though, those can be a little iffy. You need to leave those rest for quite some time after you get them established or seeded before you even start to graze on those because until they root down, you can pull them out and damage them pretty good. So,
What is the best seed after chopping oatlage to graze? So a seeding following oatlage.
yeah, I'd like a diverse mix of some warm seasons in there, whether it's a BMR Bercritic Dwarf Sorghum Sedan, get some good a good BMR variety there, Pearl Millet, cowpeas, mung beans, sunflower, sun hemp. Those are some species that are going to give you some warm season grazing. you can graze that out or let it even in frost kill, or you could come in after a good heavy graze, or if you're going to even take that off for some haylage or baleage as well, or graze it or whatever you're going to do with that, and come in with a cool season biennial mix. I don't like to put cool season mixtures in too early in the summer, or else they just don't really get the job done. It's too warm for them. So I like to capitalize those warm season month with warm season annuals. So plenty of charts out there, plenty of seed dealers around there. I'm sure that would be able to get you in the right track on that. But I'd focus on warm season annuals, primarily the grasses and a few legumes in there.
So one of our new and continual growing programs and projects that we're working with, and Judy's kind of the ramrod here of this is our resource hub. So you can go on our resource hub and Judy's got several blogs and farmer interviews and testimonials on here. We have many more of those how-to videos, and actually here at the end of the month going to do a whole nother video shoot with many more videos. So be on the lookout for those later in the year. These webinars are a part of this program as well. And this is all possible through our partners, the Illinois Forage and Grassland Council, U of I, and then the NRCS. So we're happy to have those on board, folks on board with us to be partners on these projects. And so back to the hub, real quick, what's so good about that, and what our vision is to for producers of any experience type to be able to go on there, search questions, and find relative and informational resources on there to answer questions and to help you through your forage management process, whether that's hay, grazing, soils, or various types of livestock. So, and for some reason, if there's no articles on there to answer questions, we have a really big, easy to find Ask Us a Question tab. So if you hit that tab, it'll send you to a little questionnaire, and we get those emails directly to Judy and I. And so far, we've been able to answer many of those questions or emails within 24 to 48 hours. A lot of times, we'll reply with a brief email and then set up a phone call shortly thereafter. So, like I say, we're not hanging you out to dry by any means, and taking weeks or months to reply. So this, like I say, this is something that will continue to build and grow, and we're very pleased with how it's working out.